So, my name is Franklin Leonard. I'm the founder of something called The Blacklist. Some of you may know what that is. For those of you who don't, we are an organization that identifies and celebrates great screenwriting and the people who do it. So it only makes sense that I'm here celebrating Black Panther. I have notes, so I apologize, but I'm going to use them so I can ask better questions. But I was actually just telling Kevin and Joe outside, my great frustration with Black Panther is that so much of the narrative around the movie has been focused on how much money it made, which is a lot, 1.3 billion worldwide, I think. Is that the right number?
I think close, yes.
Yeah. It's the biggest movie in the US and Canada this year, the second biggest in the world. There's been a lot of talk about the movie's social and cultural import, which is undeniable. I think it's changed the conversation around a lot of things as it applies to representation on screen. But the one thing that I don't think that has been talked about enough is the sheer technical brilliance of the thing, the cinematic quality of it. And as somebody who frankly just loves movies and loves really, really good movies, and particularly really, really good writing, I've been waiting for this part of the year so I can have this conversation all the time, and it is very exciting to be able to have it with President of Marvel and the co-screenwriter of Black Panther, Joe Robert Cole. So let's give them another round of applause. So, how did you guys? How long ago did you guys connect? Because my understanding is that this sort of working relationship has been in existence in some form or another, long predating this movie in this form.
Yeah, we used to have. Do I need the mic or can you hear me?
You're Jake Well.
We had a writers program going back many years, and Joe was in that. Were you in that first group?
I was in. I was in 2011 to 2013. There was a crop before me, but yeah.
And it was about hiring talented writers that had samples, that had agents, but that were looking, to come and join us for a period of time and work on a number of things and just develop in-house. And Joe was a part of that and did some good work, which is how we knew he'd be good for this. And Nate Moore, our executive producer, had the thought to bring him on to Panther. And I don't think, did that require a whole lot of arm twisting?
No, it was a pretty easy request. I came in and I pitched, but it was they come and ask and you go.
So 2011 is when we first met.
And so was Ryan involved in the Black Panther conversation at that point, or was this sort of original, just you pitching?
In 2011?
No. But when the conversation around Black Panther began, how does that happen?
I knew that they wanted to do, that there was potential for a standalone.
Right.
And then when they did Captain America Civil War, the success of that and the popularity of the Black Panther character, and so you knew it was coming down the pipe. I think they started, I don't want to speak for you, but I think they started having some conversations with Ryan. Separately, they were having conversations with writers, and I think that it was a thing where they, were talking to him, and he was interested in writing, and they were wanting to put something together, and so it was a bit of an arranged marriage, but it was a lovely thing, and a big part of that was because he's so amazing. Yeah. I mean, he's so collaborative, he's so gracious, and they put us together. And I remember Nate telling me, he's saying, you guys are gonna really love each other. You're gonna really like each other, and they put us together, and we got in a room, and you realize you have very similar life experiences in terms of things that you're interested in, and that you've been scratching at in terms of like what would make the movie special and what you're interested in terms of like exploring with the film, and then you just kind of follow the lead of someone as special as him and work that way.
And what is the brief that you and Ryan get, Kevin? Like what are you saying? Okay, we're gonna make a Black Panther movie. What I'm getting at is I feel like the stakes for making this movie were extraordinarily high. And I want to sort of go down the levels in which they were, but I'm curious, what was the brief from y'all? Okay, go make this Black Panther movie, but this is what we need.
Well, I think it's understood at this point that it needs to be a film that works around the world, and a film that satisfies on levels of entertainment that audience come to expect and that we love to do. It also had to satisfy on the level of acknowledging its place as the first Black Panther film, the first with a African character at the lead, and a first with a 90% plus cast of African or African Americans, and therefore it had to succeed, not just because it was a very expensive movie that had high expectations, but it had to succeed to dispel a myth that a film like that wouldn't work on a global level. Right. And that's what made the risks, not the budget, not anything, that's what made the risks higher for us. That if it didn't work, it wouldn't just be about a big movie not working. It would be about, we didn't want to be part of fulfilling what we believe to be a falsehood about the kind of movies that can play in on the other side of the world.
And Joe, you and I were joking about an additional stake for this movie. Do you want to talk about it, or should I say it?
As an African American, someone involved, part of the African diaspora, there's a tremendous, that people are watching, and that you got to go back and talk to your family and your friends, and they're going to see the movie.
Like, you're going to be at barbecues for the rest of your life. And if this doesn't deliver,
if it doesn't work, you're going to hear it. And so, that's out there, but it's a very real thing that is there. But when you're working, you just pour your heart into it, and you give it everything you have, and you rely on those experiences from the community and your life and all that to kind of to push you and propel you into the work. And everyone involved, whether they were Black or part of African diaspora, or not, poured themselves into it and really embraced what it was that we were trying to do. Ryan has said, a lot of your notes were about being more personal. Be more it wasn't make it try to appeal to this or that. It was make it special.
So this is the other thing I wanted to ask about from just a process perspective, because so yes, you have to make it a sort of a big action movie that plays around the world. You have to make it a Marvel movie. I think what feels different about it is the personal intimacy of the thing. And knowing you and Ryan, I've known you both now you for more than 10 years and Ryan for about that long, there's so much of you as individuals in this movie. I mean, the line that I keep coming back to is, how crazy is that? Just a kid from Oakland chasing a dream. Ryan grew up in Oakland and still lives there. Talk about your connection to the Bay Area for a little bit.
I went to school there and found myself. My heart is in the Bay. I love the Bay, and it's one of the things. It's interesting. It was one of the things that Nate was like, dude, you and Ryan are gonna, because I had been talking about the Bay so much.
Well, you're both Bay. You were both college athletes. The overlap is sort of wild, honestly.
Yeah. So.
But can you talk a little bit about the process? Okay, so you have this brief. You know what the stakes are.
Mm-hmm.
How do you and Ryan set off to construct a narrative? Do you talk first about what themes you want to explore? Walk everyone through what that looks like.
I think the themes were the first element. It's like there are certain things that, you start from the comics. It's there. We had to, we were working from what was in Captain America: Civil War as a beginning place, and that was done so wonderfully that T'Challa's character was so noble. He had so much depth. He was intelligent. So it was a great starting place for us. So first we started with what was there. Then you look at the canon, and then you go from there and you talk about things that are important that you want to explore. The relationship, the conversation between African and African Americans. This idea of what it means to be a member of the African diaspora in the context of this our world and the superhero world. We one of the themes that really is kind of roots the film is, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And it's this idea that we have a responsibility to each other in a global way even. And so, we explore what that means in terms of Wakanda, in terms of family, in terms of Killmonger being, I guess, an orphan in a way, not only an orphan as African Americans feel disconnected from the continent, but an orphan even personally as a family member. So we tried to personalize larger themes through character. And so we tried to explore it that way.
Yeah, there's a quote that sort of keeps coming back to me in the context of his role specifically, and that's to be an African American is to be African without memory and American without privilege. Which, I mean, literally, if you were to build a character based on that idea, I think it would end up being Killmonger. I also want to talk about women in the film, because I think one of the things that differentiates this from literally just about every other big budget movie I've ever seen is the role of women. And it's no secret, obviously, that in African communities, some of the few matrilineal societies in the world are in Africa, and it's no secret that sort of black women are the backbone of the African American community. Where did that come from? Like, I mean, the Dora were already a character in the context of the comic, but like, in constructing them, can you talk a little bit about how you thought about the role of women in the movie? It feels very intentional.
It's real. It's how it should be. When you say intentional, I laugh because we looked at the women in our lives, the women we grew up around, those figures informed who the different characters were. We relied on the wonderful women that were behind the scenes and in front of the camera, because you have to know what you don't know. You know what I mean? So you go into it and you're trying to make characters that are multidimensional and that aren't monolithic and don't all think alike. And so we had some structural things we tried to do, tried to put characters as, innovation on one side, traditionalism on the other side, and try to work that through, the drama of scenes. But we relied on, we would ask questions. There's so many wonderful women involved in the project that poured their hearts into it. Our DP was a woman, our AD was a woman. There was Ruth Carter. There was Hannah, and and then the women in our lives. And there's I'm spacing now. There were lovely actresses, that we relied on in terms of characters, Lupita and Denai, and it goes on and on. So,
Kevin, I'm curious for both of you. This movie feels very contemporary and connected to our modern politics, and our modern politics feel like they are changing by the day. And what's fascinating though is even watching the last hour of it tonight, it still feels like it is a direct commentary on what's happened in the last 6 months since the movie's come out. And I'm curious clearly the movie was always going to be political in the making of it, but how did you think about managing the political dialogue within the film, and were there changes that were made as you made the film to address the political reality that you thought you saw or that you saw?
There weren't many. I mean, the world has keeps catching up to the relevancy of Black Panther as opposed to the other way around. There were always two main pillars. There were the questions, as Joe has just said, that Joe and Ryan were asking and were bringing to the film about being African American and about the relationship of an African American to the continent of Africa, which is one of the things that makes the movie so special and so unique and so personal to Joe and to Ryan. The other thing was this sort of geopolitical commentary of the concept that Stanley and Jack Kirby had, which is this nation that we didn't know about in Africa that had never been colonized, and we discover that it's real, and we get to go there and we see the amazing people, amazing things. But that brings up another question. Where have they been? Why haven't they been? A lot of stuff's happening in Africa in the last 1,000 years. Why didn't they help? So that had to become big part of the story as well. We couldn't just pretend that it was this fairy tale world in the middle of Africa. So that started bringing up questions of the dangers of isolationism and the dangers of nationalism. And a lot of that started to make the notion of Wakanda real within our story. And there may have been a few lines of dialogue in his speech to the UN at the end.
Yeah, there was one
It changed
particular,
slightly.
in times of crisis, the wise build bridges, while the foolish build barriers.
That's the one.
We must find a way to look after one another as if we were one single tribe.
Yeah.
Similarly, on the politics thing, one of the things that struck me, I remember asking several Disney employees at the premiere. The film obviously ties the Black Panther, the comic book character, to the Black Panthers, the American political movement and party. And I feel like there's a great deal of other sort of things happening along those lines. I assume that was conscious. Was that a concern?
No, I mean, what was it? It was not a concern in that that's what Marvel Comics did 50 years ago, right? So, and we did look up, we've not been able to find. We looked early on. What came first? Did one inspire the other? And they happened almost at the same time in different parts of the country.
Really?
And I think that
I
the
did not realize
names, it's a coincidence. The themes perhaps are not. The themes came about from what was happening in the country at that time. But at no point did we want to pull any punches. We wanted to be sure that at one point Shuri is startled when Martin Freeman's character comes around the corner and she goes, "Colonizer."
Which has become part of the lexicon.
Totally.
Yeah.
There were earlier versions of the story where basically everyone from Wakanda referred to anybody who was not from Wakanda as colonizers, including T'Challa. And that started to seem like it was distant. It would distance certain members of the audience from the characters in a way that we didn't want to do, and Ryan didn't want to do. But that's actually the only example I can think of where we've said, "Oh wait, let's." Yeah. The movie, the entire message of the movie, and the line you just mentioned, is about being inclusive. So it ended up being we kept it with Shuri and Ross.
I mean, the other thing that struck me, obviously the final moment, Killmonger's final moments, where he says, "Bury me in the ocean with the slaves who knew that death was better than bondage." I can't think of another big budget studio movie that has ever explicitly acknowledged slavery as a reality on Earth.
It was a line I feel like it was in the first draft, and in a meeting we had, we called that out to Ryan as one of the most meaningful lines we'd ever seen. And although there were a lot of notes on that first draft, as there are in any first draft, we said don't change that.
Yeah.
And he said, we were still getting to know each other early on. He goes, "I thought that was the line you were going to ask me to cut." And
I thought it was a line that you would have asked me to cut.
I said, on the contrary, this is the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, it made me cry. Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. Okay, so one other question, and then we'll open it up. The third time I saw the movie, this was the sixth. I had this realization after I finished it that the final fight scene literally happens on an underground railroad. Right? So I texted Ryan and I was like, I mean, really? And he was like, yeah, and literally this was the exact message back. Yeah, there are a few things in there like that, which is so Ryan. What else am I missing?
Oh,
come on, you gotta give me one. I've been waiting for this opportunity for like months.
This is more pressure than writing a movie. Come on. No, I don't know, man.
But that one was. Did you just did you realize it after? Because here's my theory, and this is the thing that I think is so remarkable about the film. The script is it is very easy to think of a movie like this as a big action movie, whatever. The more I think about it, the more I think back to, like, Shakespeare had stage combat. The themes that you guys are exploring are sort of fundamentally elemental. From a macro societal perspective, from a sort of human interpersonal relationship perspective, I mean, the relationship between a hobby and a koe, like country or love, all of these things are in the realm of what we would think of as epic, narrative, Shakespearean drama. And everything feels incredibly intricately woven. I'm wondering whether, for example, having the final fight scene in the Underground Railroad, which is obviously a very important part of the sort of diasporic narrative, did you realize that after the fact? Like, oh, we have this Underground Railroad, maybe this should happen here, or are you building to it? Like, how are you finding these remarkable threads, or is just this a consequence of you've done so much talk about what things you want in the movie that it is inevitable that they end up threading together?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think it's a lot of your. I can't say that I sat and had conversations with Ryan like, let's put this Easter egg in the movie. Let's put this. I can't say that he might have had that conversation with somebody else, but we never. What we talked about was. We talked about life. We talked about what the character should be doing. We talked about how they should be feeling. It really was much more of a, how somebody would communicate in that moment with each other if they felt these certain things. That's the kind of stuff we talked about. And obviously you're trying to understand the dynamic, there's plot things you're working through and that, but like those elements were much more a consequence of the world we live in, a consequence of the history of it's something that's probably baked into the fabric of our storytelling than it is something that's overt. I think we really tried to stay human and think about the movie as a movie that is not only personal but also is broader than that. You're talking about the political circumstance now and that last and the speech. Am I my brother's keeper? It is about a broader thing. And so we tried to, the broadest we are as human. So we tried to work from that point.
Yeah, I have one more question. Is there, are you guys all, to what extent are you also working with, there's a survivor's remorse issue in the African American community. And I think as, I grew up in West Central Georgia. I have family members who are not as lucky as I am to be working in Hollywood and have these jobs. I'm sure you do, I'm sure Ryan does. Mm-hmm. I also view the movie and Wakanda as sort of the reality of being an upper middle class black person, and to what extent do we have an obligation? Could you talk a little bit, was that part of y'all's conversation, or again, is that just coincidence, and again, just sort of an elemental reality of great drama that you guys executed at this level?
It is, it's a little bit of what, I can only speak for me. As an African American, you look at our country, you grow up in the country, and there's broad swaths of the country. It's the greatest place in the world, it's the greatest country ever. We have the most resources, the most military, we have so much, and yet if you look at places where people are suffering, we only go to places to do things when it's in our own self-interest. And it's that idea of what do you do when you are at the top? And so we often, as African Americans, spend time going, well, it would be better. But the question is, if you were at the top, would it? Right. How would you, so you start to, you start to kind of play with that. And so it's a little bit of, just kind of, it's a little bit of that more than it is like, and you feel, I still, I know how lucky I am and I've got family and who are not as lucky and, but I also am not a nation, a wealthy nation that could change. So for me, it's a much bigger, the thing you can do is you can mincer, you can do all these things, but like when you have the resources and you don't act, what does that say? And so, and just kind of exploring that on a geopolitical, like on a how would we behave, and who would be the people going, no, we got to go out there. Who are the Nikias, and who are the the Koes, or who are the so that's the kind of deal.
I just love that those questions can be explored in a movie that can make $1.3 billion. All right, questions. Right here.
Hi. So my question is, basically, this movie has a lot of like African influences. How did you go about portraying that in a very realistic and real way when you were writing it or casting it or just making it?
That was one of the very first thing Ryan did when he signed up and agreed to direct and co-write the movie for us. He said, I want to go to Africa. Like literally right away. That was the first thing he asked. And it's unusual, usually you do a location scout when you have more of your crew together. Ryan said, I've never been to the continent. I need to go now. And he went for 3 weeks all around Africa, and he'll tell you amazing stories about it, and really had I believe, life-changing experience while he was over there. He has talked about it quite a bit. And it's amazing. And he came back, even while he was there, started sending us pictures of mountains, of snow-capped mountains. He said, I didn't know there were snow-capped mountains, which led to M'Baku's, the production design of that section of Wakanda. And he brought back almost everything. He brought back so much reference material that could specifically be handed to Ruth Carter, our costume designer, and Hannah Beachler, our production designer, and Rachel Morrison, our cinematographer, about even the quality of light and the type of materials. But he also brought back in himself a deeper understanding of the connection between Africa and African Americans that he had never felt before. So that alone set us on a path that was remarkably unique. And then, as Joe had already talked about, the cast, particularly Denai and Lupita, brought their own experiences from growing up and living in Africa. So much so that there were things that, in a traditional movie, I don't know, on any movies, the actors start asking for, they want this, or stop filming, we need this or that. You go, well, oh boy, oh no, actors have, what is this? And in particular, there were moments when we were shooting the Warrior Falls scene, where I think it was both Lupita and Denai, and then slowly the entire cast came up to Ryan and said, there needs to be music, there needs to be music, there needs to be chanting. There's never this many people gathered in any country in Africa for a ceremony that doesn't have music. And we brought in somebody that created that music, created those chants. That would not be there. And that, by the way, you watch the movie, that's the whole sequence. That's what we all know. That's what we all remember. That came from the cast. And it is something that was remarkable to be a part of, more so than any film we've ever made. Everybody being there, knowing they are part of something historic, knowing they are part of something special. I feel this way about any movie I make. I feel very lucky to make a movie, and if it doesn't work, I'll never be able to make another movie again. So I better make this one work. Not everybody shares that, and if people come in, they clock out, they're not a part of it from beginning to middle to the end. But on this film, every single person that stepped foot on the set or in the office gave it more than 100%, because they all knew this had to be special.
Yeah. Hannah, our production designer, did a tremendous amount of research and put together a Bible that laid out the tribes and the history of each one, and we use it as reference material. And she did the research kind of root. She took from the continent and cultures that existed there, and kind of drew from that to create Wakanda's history and cultures. And so we were able to use that as our resource, just in a practical way also.
The woman in the film were my favorite parts. What I found was that I've watched so many movies this year be on the nominating committee, usually serve their story. And what I found with Black Panther, there was such agency with female characters that they were equal with the guys, and in such a way that usually it's one or the other. It's they're serving the male protagonist story, or they are elevated so high it diminishes the main protagonist. But there was such equality with the characters in Black Panther, and you saw that they valued each other, their input, what they contributed, and in such a Denai Guerrera just won the People's Choice Award for movie action star of the year, and she was up against Thor,
Yeah.
Black Panther. She was up against all these great action heroes, and yet so many people saw that she was as great as they were, and that was because of how you wrote the woman, and I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
They were the first playwright to win the People's Choice Award for Best Action Hero. I mean, I only realized actually recently that Denai, Lupita, and Letitia were in Denai's play, like at the public.
Yep.
Was it right before or right after the film?
I thought it was right before.
Yeah, it must
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
But it's just crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, you have one of the best plays in New York in the last 5 years, and then you have them together in this film. It just speaks to the quality of it. Anyway, there was a question over here.
Yeah. What was the process, like for you guys kind of trying to find an arc for T'Challa, seeing as how he was already like kind of introduced, and you know, he wasn't like Thor where like his powers had been stripped away or something like that, you know, so he was kind of already realized as a man. What was that process like for y'all trying to figure out what his arc would be in the film?
That's a good question. You know, one of the interesting things about T'Challa is that in the canon, in the comic, he's kind of got everything. He's finding the warts in him was something we talked about, me and Ryan and Nate and all of us, we talked about quite a bit. You know, one thing that we inherited that was really fertile was that his father died in Captain America: Civil War, and that offers kind of a fertile terrain to kind of explore, you know, and him, you know, we wanted to kind of introduce to explore him through his nation and through the people he interacted with. And so taking the nation of Wakanda and looking at its kind of trajectory after it's lost its king, and it's, you know, kind of exploring what the past is and the past wrongs, allowed us to kind of give him an arc to where he's ultimately correcting or trying to right wrongs from the past, but also coming to terms with having lost his father and loving his father and missing his father. This is a person that's been so instrumental in his life, and just there was a lot of opportunity to kind of explore in a personal way him, and the antagonist, or Eric Killmonger, allowed us to actually even personalize his relationship with our antagonist in a way that oftentimes you don't get to do by making them cousins. And so, and really allowing the antagonist to affect your protagonist and to actually change him in a fundamental way. So there was a lot of, you know, we explored this thing, but there was a lot of material there for us to work with. So.
Yeah, I actually have a question about that too, or to expand on that, on Killmonger as well. Really, he's one of the first villains I've seen in a big budget movie to actually change the perception, change the character of Killmonger, of T'Challa, the protagonist, which I haven't really seen. All the villains are, I don't even like to call him a villain. He's more of an antagonist who has his own goals against the protagonist, who happens to be the main person in the story. So I want to know, what was really the process of walking in with somebody like Killmonger? Because I've read some of the comics, and he's not really he's not as empathetic as he is in this movie, which is very, very very powerful, I noticed. So what was it like building empathy for the antagonist, or building empathy for someone?
I want to add to that question, because one of the things that I was also most fascinated by about this movie was the Twitter conversation after the film came out. The number of people tweeting some version of Killmonger was right. Because there definitely is a moment where you're like, wait a minute, T'Challa might be the bad guy here? How do you build that? And how do you maintain sort of shifting allegiances in the context of what should be and what is historically in these kinds of movies clear good and evil?
Well, first you have people that you're working for that are open to that kind of thing and that embrace that. I mean, and I mean that in a very real way.
No,
You know,
on the studio side, I appreciate how rare that is.
You know, so you're taking someone who, so I guess sometimes it's not what you believe, it's how you go about it, right? And so Killmonger, in a lot of ways, again, going back to Am I My Brother's Keeper, what he is saying is, you should not have allowed this to happen. You had a chance to fix this, and that is what has scarred me to such an extent that I'm going to go, you know, to the furthest degree and right your wrong by actually, you know, adopting some of the similar tactics of imperialism that I suffered under, you know. And so the freedom to actually explore something like that is the first thing to say, you know, that isn't something that everyone, that makes people nervous, you know. So, but then just to try to see what it feels like, you know, you explore as an African American, where's that anger and that frustration and that confusion and the disconnect, and how does that make you feel, and how would that feel if we all knew? I mean, think about if there was a place, how would we feel about that place? Let's kind of explore it in a personal way, and then try to, you know, I think one of the, I can't remember, was it, maybe you remember, like, I remember we were trying to figure out how we connected, made sure we knew it was like the ring, and we're trying to figure out the connection, like trying to make sure that personal connection resonated. It was tricky. It was like trying to, you know, explore those things and to root it in that familial way also. And Ryan has, I mean, you know, he has so many great ideas, man. The ancestral plant, like those that, like to have those parallel, like father son, all of that stuff is, you know, he's fantastic. Not only as a person, but just an extraordinary creative mind.
And part of that was him knowing to ride the balance, and to take it just far enough where you go, is T'Challa going to be complicit in all this once he knows it, and then he's not.
Right.
And that was Ryan, you know, really saying I want to address these questions, and also address the fact that somebody like Killmonger obviously is going too far. Right. And I love when, you know, the line that T'Challa says to Killmonger, "You've become them. You become what you're fighting against."
Yeah.
Because of the success of Black Panther, I want to know, as the head of the Marvel Studios, what steps you plan to take on taking these classic comic book characters and not only modernizing them, but incorporating diversity within your cast and your crew and in your plots.
Well, I think we've been lucky that in large part, thanks to Stan Lee, may he rest in peace, and Jack Kirby, who created Black Panther, the comics for years have been diverse, but usually below the title, but within the storylines, quite diverse. And a lot of our casts and a lot of our movies have represented that. A number of years ago, we said it's not enough. It's not enough, and that's what led to this film, to a film we have coming out in March called Captain Marvel, and frankly, to every film we make after that, because we want our films to represent the world. And look what happens with this movie when people who aren't used to seeing themselves up on that big screen have the chance to do it. And that's something that you can't take for granted. that everybody deserves to have. Certainly what I had when I was a kid growing up, which is heroes that they can respond to and relate to. And I think with a good movie, you can respond to anybody, whether they're the same gender, the same ethnicity or not. But we need to have heroes that represent the world. So going forward, that's what we're doing.
All right, we got time for
One more.
one more?
Wrap up, yeah, sorry.
All right,
Thank you.
it's gonna be you,
Okay.
but no pressure as the last one. So
That's okay. It's kind of well. I have seen this now 9 times.
Wow.
So, I really do love this movie. It just hits on great script, amazing script. Without a script, you got no movie. But the Wakandan language, it's so beautiful, and everybody has that same lilt. Where did that come from? Is that actually an African dialect that they learned, or did someone make it up?
I'm not sure. That's a Ryan question. It wasn't in the script. I mean, that's
It's not made up.
It's not made up. It's
It's
above,
not
but
made
it's above my pay grade.
It's not made up, and it is based on a number of different languages, and a number of different accents based on how each of the actors.
Yeah, and
perform.
they would talk about what.
But it's very important. Ryan didn't want to invent a science fiction language of any kind for the Wakandans. So it is based in.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere that's connected to Xhosa.
Yeah,
which is-
primarily. Yeah.
And I only recognize that because of the clicks, and I lived in South Africa for 3 months, like almost 20 years ago. But I know that it was like synthesized through a lot of sort of Southern African languages like Xhosa and Zulu and a few others. I just remember reading that from some. I've also read a lot about the movie because I'm a big fan. Anyway, thank you all for coming. It seems pretty obvious that you enjoyed it. Let's give a night, Kevin and